Hello, true crime fans. Welcome to Debate the News True Crime live on Chatter Social. I'm Joseph Labasco, joined by my amazing co host Adrian Barker. Tonight, we delve into the shocking case of Teddy Kyle Smith, a former rising actor from rural Alaska who became the subject of a massive manhunt in 2012 after a bizarre and violent series of events. This case has it all: an indigenous film star turned fugitive, a 2-week wilderness manhunt, and a trial that raised tough questions about mental health, cultural beliefs, and justice in remote communities. Some of the details we'll discuss, including shootings and attempted murders, are intense and may be disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know needs support, help may be available via the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Adrian and I are not law enforcement, lawyers, medical professionals, or forensic experts. We do our best to research each case thoroughly, but this show is recorded live with minimal editing. Any factual inaccuracies are unintentional. Any persons or entities mentioned who have not been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrian, or Debate the News.
In 2012, Teddy Kyle Smith's quiet Arctic village was rocked when he allegedly shot 2 hunters and then claimed that mythical beings from the Inupiaq folklore compelled him to do it. For nearly 2 weeks, authorities scoured the Alaska tundra for Smith as rumors swirled about what really happened. Was this a man suffering a mental break or something more supernatural? By the time Smith surrendered, the community of Kiana was left with frightened villagers, injured victims, and a ton of questions.
We'll start by walking through a detailed timeline of events, from Smith's early success as an actor, through the 2012 manhunt and violent encounters, to his trial, conviction, and the appeals that followed. Along the way, we'll highlight the unique issues this case raises, like rural jury selection and indigenous perspectives on criminal justice. Then we'll pose some discussion questions to spark debate on the broader themes, topics like cultural identity in court, mental health, media representation, rural policing, and whether the punishment fit the crime. Finally, we'll wrap up with our thoughts on the case's legacy and the lessons it leaves behind, in the same spirit as our past episodes on Amanda Knox, the Idaho student murders, and the Eric Rudolph manhunt. This is Debate the News True Crime. Let's dive into the timeline on the Teddy Kyle Smith saga. Before he ever made headlines as a fugitive, Teddy Kyle Smith wasn't always a wanted man. In fact, just a year before the crime spree, he was being celebrated as an actor. Smith, a U.S. Marine veteran and an Inupiaq man from the small village of Kiana in northwest Alaska, co-starred in the 2011 indie film On the Ice, a thriller set in the Arctic that premiered at Sundance and earned him local acclaim. Within his community, he was respected for bringing authentic Inupiaq culture to the screen. But behind the scenes, Smith struggled. He had a reputation as a heavy drinker with an erratic side, and he'd had several run-ins with the law in years past. Court records show he had prior assault charges in 2000, 2003, and 2005, to which he pleaded no contest, and even a restraining order against him in 2010. In other words, trouble was not entirely new to Teddy Smith, but nothing could foreshadow the violent chaos that would erupt in late 2012.
So the turning point came in early September 2012 with a family tragedy. On September 7th, Alaska State Troopers responded to the home of Smith's mother, 74-year-old Dolly Smith, in Kiana. She was found dead under what troopers called suspicious circumstances. The way her body was discovered and reported raised red flags, and investigators wanting to speak with Teddy, her son, as part of looking into her death. But when officers arrived in Kiana that day, Teddy Kyle Smith did not cooperate. In fact, he snapped. And according to the Anchorage Daily News, Smith suddenly fires a rifle into a crowd of people outside his mother's house, sending at least 4 villagers running for cover. I want you to picture this in your mind. One witness said he even heard a bullet whiz by him. Thankfully, no one was injured in that gunfire. But by the time the shock wore off, Smith had vanished into the wilderness. He fled into the remote Alaskan bush, and it was like he disappeared into thin air. It's like a void, one trooper told reporters at the time. Nobody had seen him, no one has had contact, and as far as we know, he's not called anyone. So Adali's unexplained death and now Teddy's armed flight, a massive manhunt is now underway. And so for days, Alaska state troopers and local search teams scoured the rivers of the tundra around Kiana, warning that Smith was armed and he could be dangerous.
For nearly 12 days, Teddy Kyle Smith evaded authorities in the vast Alaskan wilderness. The search stretched over rugged terrain, with daylight shrinking each day as autumn set in. Then, on September 19, 2012, an urgent distress call suddenly brought the manhunt to a head. Two hunters, brothers Paul and Charles Buckle, from Kotzebue, had been on a boat trip down the remote Squirrel River and stopped at their friend's small cabin to camp for the night. Inside, to their surprise, they found none other than Smith already occupying the cabin, claiming to be performing maintenance for the owners. Initially, things were calm, but the hospitality quickly evaporated. At some point, one of the Buckle brothers noticed their satellite phone had gone missing, and when the other turned his back, Smith suddenly pulled a revolver and began yelling. A violent altercation erupted in the tiny cabin. Smith opened fire on the brothers, shooting Charles Buckle in the chest and Paul Buckle in the shoulder. Both men were seriously wounded. Believing he'd incapacitated them, Smith then stole the brothers' inflatable river raft and their hunting gear and took off down Squirrel River, using the stolen boat to speed his escape. Despite their injuries, the Buckle brothers were incredibly lucky to survive. As the prosecutor later noted, quote, "This easily could have been a double murder case," end quote. Bleeding and in pain, the Buckles managed to activate a distress call and reach authorities for help.
The call from the Buckle brothers set off a coordinated response at first light. By the morning of September 19th, Alaska state troopers, along with members of the elite Northern Special Emergency Response Team, swarmed into action. They airlifted the injured brothers out to safety, first to Kiana, and then by medevac plane to hospitals in Kotzebue and Anchorage. Meanwhile, multiple trooper teams fanned out by plane and boat along the Squirrel River, effectively setting up a blockade downstream to cut off Smith's escape route. Amazing. With the wilderness around him now crawling with law enforcement, Smith actually ran out of places to run. Confronted by troopers around 16 miles from Kiana, Teddy Kyle Smith surrenders without incident, ending a 2-week manhunt. It was a relief to see him in custody with no further bloodshed. And in the aftermath, the small community of Kiana could finally breathe easier, though they were still left reeling from the shocking chain of events. Smith was immediately flown to a regional jail to await charges and a nice, yucky bed to sleep in, and I think a stainless sink with a stainless toilet. Just wanted to describe that for you, while investigators began untangling the full list of crimes that had unfolded.
Definitely, Adrian. Authorities soon hit Smith with a litany of felony charges for his September rampage. These included 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder for the Buckle brothers, 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of first-degree robbery, plus additional assault charges for the gunfire incident in Kiana on September 7th. Notably, despite early suspicions, troopers announced that they found no evidence Smith was involved in his mother Dolly's death. By late 2014, they had ruled out foul play and marked her cause of death as undetermined. In other words, that part of the mystery remains unsolved, but Smith was not charged with anything relating to his mother. Fast forward to November 2014, that's when Teddy Kyle Smith finally went on trial in the State Superior Court of Kotzebue, which is the nearest courthouse to Kiana, about 50 miles away. The trial lasted about a week. By this time, over 2 years had passed since the events, and the courtroom was packed with people from the region who were following the case. The basic facts of what happened were not really in dispute. The evidence clearly showed Smith had fled into the wild, encountered the hunters, shot them, and so on. The real question was, why did he do it? Was Teddy Smith a cold-blooded would-be killer? Or was there something fundamentally wrong about his mental state at the time? Smith's defense team even raised concerns about his sanity. At one point before trial, they requested a competency evaluation. But after review, a judge found Smith was mentally fit to stand trial. So the trial moved forward, and Smith himself took the stand to give his own extraordinary explanation for his actions.
When Teddy Kyle Smith spoke in court, the story he told was unlike anything the jurors had heard in a typical crime case. Smith claimed that during those harrowing days on the run, he had been influenced, maybe even possessed by supernatural beings. Specifically, he said he encountered Iñukuns, the little people of the Inupiaq folklore, while he was alone in the wilderness. What? In the Inupiaq tradition, Inukians, sometimes called Iñukuns, are mythical, diminutive beings that live in the tundra and are known to play tricks or even lead people astray. And Smith testified that these entities, they were menacing him, telling him what to do. He described hearing voices and seeing figures in the woods, which he interpreted as the Inukians guiding his violent actions. Okay, in essence, his defense was that he believed he was acting in self defense against evil forces. And that is when he fired at the Buckle brothers. He thought that they were connected to these little people who were terrorizing him. Yeah, we're not making this up, guys. Follow with me. It was a startling cultural and psychological claim. The district attorney, John Earthman, later summarized Smith's testimony, and we quote, his story was basically that he was being influenced by forces beyond his control. He discussed voices and different things that he saw in his travels out there. Okay, yeah, John Earthman didn't buy it, obviously, and ultimately, neither did the jury. And after hearing all the evidence, the jury took about 4 hours of deliberation to reach a verdict. And in December of 2014, they found Teddy Kyle Smith guilty on all counts, including, by the way, the 2 counts of first degree murder attempted on the Buckle brothers. Whatever Smith was experiencing in the wild, the legal system was holding him fully responsible for the very real world harm he caused.
The case then moved to the sentencing phase. In April 2015, a judge sentenced Teddy Kyle Smith to 99 years in prison, essentially a life sentence for the then 45-year-old man. With that, one chapter of the saga closed. But Smith wasn't done fighting. He appealed his conviction, launching a legal battle that would shine a spotlight on the unique challenges of Alaska's rural justice system. One major issue, Smith argued that he hadn't truly been tried by a, quote, jury of his peers. His trial was held in Kotzebue, a town over 50 miles from his home village, and by Alaska court rules, jurors are normally drawn only from communities within a 50-mile radius. That meant no one from Kiana or other outlying villages was on his jury, only people from the town of Kotzebue. Smith lawyers contended that this geographic rule unfairly excluded many Alaskan natives, since rural villages are predominantly native, while the town had more non-native residents. So essentially, eh, no one from his village who are Alaskan natives were on the jury. It was predominantly people who were non-Alaskan natives. In their appeal filed around 2018, they claimed the jury pool wasn't a fair cross-section of the community, and even that villagers would have better understood Smith's references to the Iñukuns and his way of life. The ACLU and the Native American Rights Fund even chimed in to support Smith's argument, pointing out a broader concern. At the time, over 150 small Alaska communities were effectively excluded from jury service by that 50-mile rule, contributing to the underrepresentation of Native Alaskans on juries. This appeal raised profound questions about rural and indigenous justice equality.
So the state of Alaska pushed back hard on Smith's appeal. Prosecutors argued that Kotzebue jurors did, in fact, represent the community, and that many people in the region, even those in town, share very similar cultural knowledge. For example, even Kotzebue residents know of the Little People legends, not just villagers. And the state also emphasized the practical side. If the court had to fly in jurors from tiny villages hundreds of miles away, the cost and the logistics would be extremely difficult. In fact, for decades, the presiding judge in that district had issued orders. shrinking the jury radius to 5 miles around Kotzebue, specifically to avoid the expense of bringing in jurors from far flung villages. Smith's team countered that cost should not outweigh fundamental fairness. The debate goes way up to the Alaska Court of Appeals, which in 2019, the Alaska Court of Appeals acknowledged the issue, but initially sent it back to the trial judge for fact finding on the cost question. After further review, the courts ultimately upheld Smith's conviction. And in a 2021 decision, the Court of Appeals ruled that the jury selection, while unusual, was constitutional given the circumstances. The Court of Appeals agreed that the 5 mile jury rule in Kotzebue was justified by the unreasonable expenses of a wider pool. So in short, Teddy Kyle Smith lost the appeal, and his 99-year sentence, guess what? It remains in place. However, his case sparked ongoing discussion in Alaska about whether the justice system needs to better include rural village residents on juries. And it puts a spotlight on the tension between logistical and practicality and the idea of a true jury of peers. And especially, you guys, when the defendant is indigenous and from a very remote community.
In the years since the trial, the Teddy Kyle Smith case has continued to fascinate and prompt soul searching, both in Alaska and beyond. In 2019, a pair of public radio producers from outside Alaska teamed up with Inupiaq storyteller James Dominic Jr. to create an audio documentary podcast about the case. It was titled Midnight Sun, and it explored not only the crime and manhunt, but also the cultural context behind Smith's claims, delving into Inupiaq mythology and the clash between traditional beliefs and the law. That podcast gained a following and set the stage for an even wider audience. In September 2025, streaming service Hulu released a feature-length true crime documentary called Blood and Myth. The documentary, executive produced and narrated by Dominic himself, featured the first on-camera interview with Teddy Kyle Smith since his arrest. Viewers see Smith speaking from prison about what he says happened to him, and the film examines the intersection of indigenous lore and the modern criminal justice system. Blood and Myth essentially brings the Midnight Sun podcast to life on screen, blending true crime thriller with a sort of ghost story and supernatural elements. The filmmakers travel through Alaskan villages, talk to people who knew Smith, to troopers who hunted him, and to cultural experts. The result is a story that forces viewers to ask, what is truth and who gets to decide? Media outlets have also jumped back on the story. Publications like People and Time ran pieces revisiting the case around the documentary's release, recounting the incredible saga of the actor-turned-fugitive and examining how myth and reality collided in this case. Over a decade later, the Teddy Kyle Smith case is being debated anew, not just as a true crime tale of a manhunt, but as a window into deeper issues of culture, mind, and justice in America.
Whoa, what a story. So, first, Joseph, before we go into discussion questions, can we have you share your review and thoughts on the documentary and what you found so compelling about the case that you wanted to do a podcast on it?
Yeah, sure. So I saw this on the new true crime documentary slate that I looked at, and I was like, okay, this looks like something that's interesting. The setting of rural Alaska is something a little bit different. I think the supernatural element of him claiming that these mystical beings compelled him to do this, I thought that's something we haven't really looked into. I thought the documentary was interesting. I felt that it was kind of trying to paint a narrative and was very sympathetic to Teddy Kyle Smith, which is fine. But it was good. I thought it was a little bit biased.
Interesting. So, James Dominic Jr. creates the audio documentary podcast, and then it actually gets picked up to become a documentary on Hulu. That's like a dream come true. But I guess the biggest question that we want to hear from Joseph and then the rest of you on Chatter Social. So he claims that little people compelled him to act violently. What is your view on this? Is it like a psychological break or a deeply held spiritual belief? How should the justice system treat such claims? What do you guys think when you hear a story like this and you're questioning, is it myth or is it a mental illness?
Yeah, I'm just gonna be real honest with my opinion. I personally don't believe in like mystical spirits and stuff like that. And I know that that's an important aspect of this culture. So I do respect that that's a thing. And a lot of people in the community do believe that. Some people have claimed to have seen them. It's very much a thing. In this case, I think that Teddy Kyle Smith, from all accounts, had a substance abuse problem, was a heavy drinker, possibly had some mental illnesses on top of that. And I think that that is ultimately what led to this kind of 2 week rampage. His mother was found dead under what I would call suspicious circumstances. Again, he was never charged with that, but he was at the scene when it happened. I think that whether he had something to do with it or not, I think that that sparked a bit of a mental breakdown combined with maybe some substance use, which is what motivated him to shoot at the troopers and then flee into the mountain. And then I think he had some paranoid delusion type thing happening, which is why he shot the hunters. He was like hyper paranoid. So that's my take, in my opinion. But I would be curious to hear everyone else's perspective.
So he had priors. Because I always question, like, if he didn't have the priors, I would think, like, well, maybe Joseph, maybe something happened. I mean, he just disappeared. So, like, what was going on in his head that had him run away? So, I would actually kind of go to maybe something mythical and supernatural could happen, but not if you have priors. There was something else going on. He would have to be tested by a psychiatrist. And what was the result of that, Joseph?
The result of it was he was fit to stand trial, and he actually took the stand in his own defense. So they had done an evaluation. I believe the judge ordered that in the beginning, and he passed it to the extent that they allowed him to stand trial.
That's so interesting too. I've always questioned that. I mean, I would think that he would have tried to act to say that he had a mental health issue, right? So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe his acting wasn't so great, Joseph. If he acted better, he could have maybe got away with it.
But you're right, Adrian, he was an actor, so that is another factor. Real, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
In my experience working with substance abusers and alcoholics, and I'm talking about severe substance abusers and alcoholics, you see a lot of delusions and hallucinations. So I think that's really what was going on. I'm with Joseph. I don't believe in the supernatural and all that stuff. So yeah, that's what I believe.
Fair enough. Okay. Joseph, you want to go to the next question?
Sure, yeah. So, should this have been brought into the trial in the first place? Do you think someone should be able to use a supernatural type defense like this in court? For me, I'll answer. I think yes. I think that if that's your defense and you're declared competent and fit to stand trial, and you, in consultation with your lawyer, decide that that's what you want to do, sure, I think you can present that as a defense. In this case, it obviously didn't work. But what do you guys think about that? Bringing the supernatural into a court case that's as serious as two attempted murder charges.
Well, I'm remembering other cases where people hear voices, or almost like in a case of postpartum depression, where sometimes people feel that there's a compelling reason. Of course, I am a child of the South and Louisiana, right? Marie Laveau, voodoo, and all of that. I was once told that people believe things to exist. And who are we to really tell them that they don't? So, what may be the supernatural to one person may be someone's daily way of living, right? So, I think that that's a good thing to bring in if that is substantiated and that is the reason why some people act the way that they do, if that makes sense. Maybe that is just their everyday and just their norm. And I think that that would certainly be compelling if I were a jurist and I was hearing this as a reason, as opposed to just saying this person is, clinically insane.
Okay, let me just say I agree with everything Miki says, so I don't have to talk. There's so many great points brought up. So yeah, I'm on the side of Miki on this one. I love it.
Yeah, I agree, Mickey. And I think that even just the psychological presentations of that type of belief system are relevant because someone who doesn't believe in mystical spirits isn't going to, in a mental health crisis, think that supernatural spirits are talking to them. But if someone has that firmly held belief just on a normal day, if they do have some type of a mental breakdown, it's possible that that can present as these mystical spirits talking to them. So yeah, I think it's definitely relevant.
Anyone else? Okay, let's go into the part that is so interesting to me. The rural policing and the justice challenges. So interesting. So, Smith's saga involved a remote wilderness manhunt and the trial held far from the actual village where the events began. So, what does this case reveal about the challenges of policing and delivering justice in rural, isolated areas? So I was supposed to say my first thought was wow. So when you think about it, so many cases they want to take it to like a new city, right? So even with let's say Casey Anthony, there was a lot of conversation. Is there trial in Orlando? Do they have it in Tampa? Do they have it in another area? Maybe they feel that people know too much about it. So you can see both cases where Smith's team is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. This is not fair. We're not getting people that understand what takes place in these small cultural villages. And then I love the prosecutions like, no, there's the same amount of people here. So I really want to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I think it's challenging anytime you have a remote rural setting and you need to get a jury pool. That's going to be difficult because in a jury pool, you want people who haven't heard about the case, but you also want to make sure that the defendant gets a fair trial and is judged by a jury of his peers. So I think just the small population and limited amount of people living in an area like that presents challenges. But also culturally, there are some differences. Like, for example, in the village that he lived in, there's no police department. There's no state troopers stationed nearby. They have something to the effect of like a safety officer, and that safety officer isn't allowed to carry a weapon. I believe they have like pepper spray. So when this all happened, the village isn't equipped to deal with someone who's, shooting into a village and having an episode like that when they're armed. So I think that presents some challenges as well.
I grew up in a town of less than 60,000 people, and I think another bias that we don't think about is that you may have people that know about this individual or the accused. They might know their grandparents or they might have been their Sunday school teacher. So there's some sort of inherent bias there because it's like, well, I knew his uncle and he's a really good person or something like that, right? Because it's really hard, especially in a lot of these small towns, when they say everybody really knows everybody. We also have to say everybody also knows generations of family because a lot of these groups, they stay there.
That's another good point. Thank you so much. Mariana.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about what Joseph was saying, but there was like no police officer. Joseph, can you repeat the last part?
It was like a safety officer. It wasn't even called a police officer. And I think they only had pepper spray. And the whole village, according to the documentary, is heavily armed. Everyone in that region has multiple guns. But the one person in the village who's the safety officer doesn't even have one gun. He has pepper spray.
Yeah, I found it very interesting because we talked so much about gun violence and how we need to regulate it, but at the same time, it's like it's the opposite in this town because it's like okay, if he needs to protect the community, how is he going to do it without having a weapon when everybody else is armed? So that just like very contradictory to me. Like makes no sense because he will never be able to help anybody in the case of a shooting, right? Because he is like pepper spray. Are you kidding? By the time he does the pepper spray, somebody is gonna shoot him. So that was like very interesting to me. The part of finding someone in the community that is not gonna know the other person, that will be hard in a small community. One of the things that it's usually very important is that both sides of the aisle, when you are accused and you go into trial, is that you agree with the jurors that are going to be selected. And so, how do you mediate that when it's just a small amount of people and everybody knows each other? It's almost like a conflict because maybe they even like the person who committed the crime. So, yeah, I don't want to be in their shoes. Yeah, a very interesting case.
Exactly, Mariana. And I think it was actually kind of a little bit silly for him to appeal and try to say that he didn't get a fair trial and he wanted people that were more natives and maybe in his village because he was an actor. So he was a bit of a local celebrity. So everyone knew him even more so than everyone would know him in that type of a town. So I think it would have been almost impossible to get a fair and impartial jury if they pulled from the communities that he was a part of because everyone already knew him. To the safety officer conversation, I think that you could even make an argument that potentially this maybe escalated to what it did because if you had a typical police force, they may have been able to apprehend him and arrest him, or maybe not even arrest him, maybe just get him some mental health treatment if that's what was going on. But because they weren't adequately prepared and they didn't have the resources to handle him in that moment, he was able to flee into the woods and then eventually committed the shooting that he wound up charged with, if that makes sense.
But wait, I'm so confused. He fires at a crowd. Luckily, nobody's hurt. He flees the scene, but then they don't even know how she passed away. Like okay, maybe she passed away of a broken heart, right? She loses her husband Donald, 56 years. I could totally understand that. What I can't understand is they never determined a cause of death or the manner. So like that's so confusing to me. And then they're like, well, we're not going to charge him for it. So why do you think they never really charged him for anything to do with his mom's death? Is that also cultural? Is that something that be, was handled in his village?
I don't know. They said that when they arrived on the scene, and these were just locals who came to the scene prior to them calling in reinforcements and prior to the safety officer coming, they noticed that he was acting very strange. They walked into the mother's trailer and he was sitting on the couch and smiling at them, acting completely normal, like nothing had happened. And then they walked into the bedroom and saw the mother dead on the floor, who had a telephone cord either wrapped around her neck or nearby as if she had been strangled. Again, they later determined that her death was undetermined and he wasn't charged. Um, so I don't know.
Crazy, crazy. And I mean, she wasn't that old at 74 years old. And I honestly, I can't remember like the last time that I've heard that they just have no idea, right? Like that's it. We don't know. They just passed away and we have no cause of death. That just seems outrageous to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they had enough to charge him on the shooting of the two hunters and charge him relating to him shooting at the people in the village. I think that from an evidence perspective, honestly, looking at it, I think it would have been difficult to convict him on the mother's death because they really just didn't have solid evidence. He was there, but the cause of death was undetermined. And I think had they thrown that into the mix, that could have swayed at least one jury to say, I don't know if he did that. And I think that muddies the waters of trying to prosecute him and hold him accountable.
So, if you dig a little deeper, really, you guys, this is a really interesting case, one that is actually being referenced in the Duke Law, Alaska Law Review. So, I find that really, really, really interesting. I'm not finding much about the attorney. So, did they have anything about the attorney in the documentary?
They really focused on the whole spiritual being angle when they were discussing the trial. That's kind of what they highlighted. So they may have mentioned specifics about the attorney, but offhand, I don't really recall.
But that was the goal for Hudson and Dominic, right? The two, they wanted to make a film that presented an authentic look at the indigenous people in northern Alaska. That was their goal. So I have this article here. It says that non-indigenous people assume all indigenous Alaskans live in igloos and dress in furs, but that's not typical of many, including the Inupiaq people. And they were hoping their film would provide a better understanding of the Inupiaq people today. And as Dumick wrote, we don't just live in museums. We're not a thing of the past. We're still here despite it all, and we're still connected to our land and to our stories. So that's why I look forward to seeing it myself. I have not seen it, but I think that's why it felt like where it was going. But their real goal was to provide that authentic look. So very interesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I will say it's definitely a good documentary. I recommend it. And hearing that angle, Adrian, I would say they absolutely succeeded in doing that. But it was kind of marketed as a true crime documentary. So I was viewing it through that lens only.
Mm.
And from that perspective, yeah, I do felt that they leaned into some of the excuses he made a little bit too heavily to the point where I was kind of rolling my eyes a little bit. While I was fascinated and I learned a lot, as far as a defense perspective, I was kind of like, okay, this is a little bit silly. But overall, it was a great documentary.
Actually, I wanna watch it now too. I wanna learn more, about the indigenous people there. So and of course, Alaska always seems to be one of those places where it's just so far off and just the culture is so different. But no, I know personally when I think of Alaska, I do not think of people in igloos and well, I think the fur definitely, of course, as they should wear something unless they're wearing parkas or like a down. I don't know. But, Joseph, where do you wanna go? No, I don't mean Alaska.
I mean, Alaska looks beautiful. I definitely would not be opposed to visiting Alaska eventually. So why don't we go to our last question, which is just about punishment and fairness. So Teddy Kyle Smith is serving a 99-year sentence for attempted murder, in which by some fortune, both victims survived. So given the circumstances, he did have several charges in the past, but he pleaded no contest. Factoring that in with his apparent mental health episode and just the cultural dimensions of the case, do you feel that a sentence of 99 years is justified for those two attempted murder charges?
Well, you do the crime, you got to do the time. Whether an angel, Jesus, the spirits, or your ancestors told you to do it. I mean, I think that's pretty consistent. Twice trying to do that, regardless of the reason, there are always consequences. And any spiritualist will pretty much tell you that there's always a price to pay for delving into that dark side. So, yes, I think that that was pretty reasonable. Hmm.
So I'll say that I agree with Miki. You do the crime, you got to do the time. 99 years does seem a little bit excessive for an attempted murder charge because the two brothers did not die. Um, I do wonder, though, if that sentence reflected the route he took in his defense, because I personally don't believe that he had mystical beings speaking to him. I think that was cap. I think that was something that he came up with after the fact, hoping that he would get at least one juror who would be sympathetic to it and let him off. I saw that defense as manipulative, and I think the way he tried to go about his appeal, I think that further supports my theory that he really wanted and intended to have a jury of people who were Alaskan natives who believe in that lore of these mystical beings. So I wonder, had he taken the defense of he had a substance abuse problem, the death of his mother sent him into a mental breakdown, he was out of his mind, he didn't know what he was doing, he was hyper paranoid and showed remorse. I wonder if that would have changed the outcome of his sentencing, as opposed to trying to blame it on mystical creatures.
It's ironic, that's for sure, because I 100% agree with you. I was thinking the same thing. I can't let you out because the mystical creatures may still be around, and they may still make you shoot someone. So, same thing, that's so ironic. The same thing he would use would be the reason why, I wouldn't wanna let him out. You know, Joseph, I wanna say that I'm really glad you picked out this story. I wasn't familiar with it to start, But you're right. At the end of the day, now you make me want to watch Hulu. So Hulu, if you're listening, we want Hulu to know that it's shows like this, podcasts like this that help to put an eye on a documentary and kind of give us a taste of it so we want more. And I think that you played a great role in that, Joseph. So I commend you and I look forward to letting you know what I think after. So if you haven't watched the documentary, please comment, send us a message, and let us know what you think after you saw it because that would be really cool. So we have a lovely audience here today. We hope you don't have any mystical things visiting you at night. But Joseph, take it away.
So, the tale of Teddy Kyle Smith is both a tragedy and a profound cautionary story. It's tragic on a human level. A mother, Dolly Smith, died under mysterious circumstances. Two men came perilously close to losing their lives on what should have been a routine hunting trip, and an entire community was thrown into fear and chaos. It's also the personal tragedy of a man who once showed promise, bringing two worlds as a modern Indigenous actor, but who spiraled into violence and delusion. In a matter of months, Teddy went from local pride to a prisoner for life. Was he simply a dangerous criminal who concocted an elaborate excuse, or a troubled soul truly convinced he was battling forces unseen? Thank you for joining us for this in-depth look at the Teddy Kyle Smith case on Debate the News True Crime. If you found this discussion informative or thought-provoking, please subscribe to the podcast. It's available on all major podcast platforms, and consider leaving a review. Your support helps us continue to shine a light on complex cases and the tough questions behind them. And I just want to clarify that we definitely have respect for the cultural perspective of the Alaskan Natives and that this is something that they believe in. It's heavily ingrained in their culture. So I don't want it to come off that I'm mocking or downplaying that. I just think in the context of a case as severe as two attempted murders, that's the context in which I'm speaking about the mystical creatures type scenario.
So, as always, we deeply appreciate you, our listeners, for being part of our true crime community. We really appreciate all of those that are here on Chatter Social and those that were able to come off mic and speak. Thank you, Miki. Thank you, Mariana. Debbie is here, but she has laryngitis, so that's why you have not heard from her. And let me just share that we've got an amazing room of people here. We've got Consuelo, we've got Heather, we've got Rebecca, we've got Angie. Angie was the Fox Hollow. Go listen to Angie's episode. It was amazing. You'll find that one. We've got Doing Life, that he's a coach, amazing man. We've got Ann, and we've got in the audience Kim, Breyer, and Momo. So we really appreciate all of your support. Even just being here makes a difference to Joseph and I. So we will be back next time with another case and another candid conversation. We're examining the facts and the controversies. You guys put so much perspective in my head today. I want to thank you all. So until then, stay safe, guys. Stay curious. Don't shoot anyone and have a great night.